Well, this is such a treat because I get to turn the tables on Reid. He's been on stage interviewing everybody, but at least I get to turn the tables on him. And Reid, I don't know if you realize how much power you've just given me, because
I do.
I can ask all kinds of questions.
Yes.
I can go off script.
Yes.
And we'll get away with it.
Yes.
So be prepared.
Always.
Well, it's wonderful to be here with you, Reid, and have a chance to have this conversation with you. You wanted to be a philosopher, right? Actually, say something about that before we start.
I've always been most interested in kind of who we are as human beings and who we should be on path to becoming, and how do we discover that? How do we discover it individually? How do we discover it together? And so my undergraduate major at Stanford was symbolic systems, which is cognitive science and artificial intelligence. Which I chose in part because Stanford is and was one of the best places in the world to do that. Then I realized we didn't really understand what thinking and language was and how to do this inference. And so I said, okay, well, maybe philosophy is the right way to do that. So I went to Oxford. And I was thinking pretty intensely that maybe being a philosophy professor was the right thing, but that my interest in this is like the lives we're leading, the work we're doing, the path that we're on. And there's a bunch of great things in philosophy, but I was like, no, how do we, and it's, gets to masters of scale, how do we do this at scale, as a species, as a society, as a company, as an individual? And so that moved me from philosophy to other things.
Well, now as a tech investor and founder, you probably spent a lot of time thinking about humans and machines. And also we're going to talk about humans and humans, but let's start with humans and machines. We're at a very interesting moment in time. You're spending an enormous amount of time in AI and a whole range of things. What's the most interesting thing going on right now, as far as you're concerned, as regards to humans and machines?
Well, one of the things that, generally speaking, about in terms of this being an amazing time to be alive is when you ask people what technological revolutions are going to be the most impact. Because, okay, artificial intelligence. All right, well, there's a bunch of stuff going on in fusion. Oh, yep, quantum. Oh, yep, AR, VR. Oh, yeah, synthetic biology. Oh, right. And you go through this, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. Now, I've been personally most focused on the artificial intelligence side, with paying attention to all the other ones, co-founded Inflection with Mustafa earlier this year. And in part of the reason for that is that, and this is, you see this theme in this entire event, this conference is that technology is part of how we evolve ourselves as human beings. Clothing, a breakfast table and sharing a meal, like there's a kitchen and there's plates and there's a table and so forth. And all of this is versions of technology. And AI is obviously in video content and everything else as frequently as either the Terminator or Ex Machina. But actually, in fact, I think the capability for being human amplifying in all this, it's the reason why, when DALL-E came out earlier, I wrote an essay about this and said, look, think about this as human amplifying and the kind of thing that we are trying to do. And so artificial intelligence has been that, but with an emphasis not on artificial intelligence as something separate from us, but something along with us.
So humans still at the center.
Yes.
In all of this. Well, that's good, because we're going to talk about humans.
Like the human-centered AI that you and I are doing together with Stanford.
That is true.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about humans then. I mean, you've thought a lot about, and for as long as you and I have known each other, about humans and human relationships and all the way to networks. Do you have a theory of the case of how to think about human relationships?
I have many theories of the case, as you know. James, as a close friend, knows that everything I do, I approach through a lens of theory because it helps me iterate and improve, just like having dashboards and all the rest. And one of the central things, if you had asked me as an undergraduate what book I was going to first write, it was a book on friendship. James and a bunch of other friends, yes, exactly, had been like, it's been a few years since we talked about that. How are you doing? And it's like, well, I'm working on it. And so I gave the commencement speech at Vanderbilt earlier this year on that. And part of that is if you think about how do you take this path of elevation, which we want as a species, we want as groups, we want as individuals, is I think your friends are central to that. That part of what friendship is that two people agreeing to try to help each other become their better selves, to be on this path and journey. And once you begin to think that, there's all kinds of things that you think as a result of that. Now, obviously, there's a whole range of relationships, and one of the things that I obviously, have been working on for a number of years is thinking about within friendships is we use this term for lots of things. We use this term for the person who might live next door to us. We use this person for the person that we might, go to the Warriors game with. We And there's some important similarities, but it's also to get the whatever that aphorism is that the Eskimos have lots of words for snow. We actually need lots of words for friendships because we need to understand some of what we're doing.
But what you're describing, though, Reid, the friendship you're describing sounds very intimate and probably doesn't scale very well. So how do you go from that to networks and scale and ultimately LinkedIn and connections? Is that a continuum? I mean, how do you go from one to the other?
Well, I think there are lots of different relationships, and part of the reason why the second book we called The Alliance, because I think there's also allies and friends are not overlap, but not the same thing. And I think that, part of when you begin to think about ethics is you want to approach the world in a spirit of friendship, but that does not mean that you are friends with everybody. It just doesn't work that way because it paradoxically for having had a whole life of a whole career of pursuing scale, friendship is not scale. Friendship is individual and personal and sacred. And actually one of the reasons why it takes me so long to get around to thinking about what to write is each friendship you have is a personal thing. Right. You don't write about it, you don't share it. So I put hours into the Vanderbilt speech going, how do I talk about my friends on stage? Right. Don't normally do that. And so, but I do think that whole thing, and part of, if you look at my investing career is primarily, not entirely, but huge thing, whether it's, LinkedIn or Facebook or Zynga or anything else, is how do you redefine the relationships of human beings by kind of these networks that we live in. And ideally, how do you get them in ways that you are better off as an individual and as a group by participating in them? And obviously there's a dynamic ongoing work and there's things that need to be done. There's always things that you need to be learning in order to do that. But that's what I think that and that's part of gets down to the June's comment is everybody in offering a product has some level of theory of human nature. And when you're doing one of these network products, you have a theory of human nature and human interaction.
Well, you actually said this. I remember, I think it was in 2011, and I think the Wall Street Journal quoted you on this. You basically said something along the lines of, social networks do best when they tap into one of the 7 deadly sins of human nature.
Yes.
Before, I'd love to hear you talk more about that, but let's actually have some fun with this.
Yes.
Lust. What's an example of a company that taps into lust?
Well, Lust is one of the two that I don't have a personal investment in, but the whole internet. But by the way, when you think about this, part of the thing that's important is transforming it. The thing about having these, the reason why the 7 deadly sins have such capture is because we all have some of these reflexes as human beings, and part of this aspiration, elevation, is how do you capture that, but transform it, elevate it, sublimate it into more. So you could go Bumble, you could go Netflix, right? There's a bunch of different things where you say, okay, that's elevating to other kinds of relationships.
Gluttony?
GoPuff, which I'm an investor in.
Envy?
Envy, vanity, Facebook. or Instagram.
Okay. Wrath?
Wrath, I also didn't have an investor, the other one's an investor and wasn't an investor in. Twitter I initially thought was vanity and Twitter is wrath.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's keep going down. Sloth.
Zynga was the personal investment. Obviously, some of these things can be multiple hits. Netflix also can fit there.
Okay. Well, I was going to go to greed, but rather than go to greed, I have a question for you. you've clearly thought a lot about this when you were building LinkedIn.
Well, speaking of greed, yes.
Yeah, and, speaking of greed.
Yes.
And LinkedIn could have easily gone down all number of paths.
Yes.
And one of the things that you've actually said quite a bit over the years is the idea that while entrepreneurs should obviously tap into these, human nature, 7 deadly sins and so forth, they have to transform them into something more interesting, more beneficial.
Yes.
Talk about how you did that at LinkedIn, and what are some of the paths you could have gone down and you chose not to?
Yeah, so because it's precisely this, like why people establish a profile, like obviously the classic thing for decades was, someone updates their LinkedIn profile when they're looking for a job and so forth. And by the way, of course that happens. But the goal of LinkedIn is to help everyone understand that life is a team sport, not an individual sport. And the tools and the community and the network is a way of saying, how do we help each other? And LinkedIn is, what are the easiest things we can do such that we can help each other? And so, for example, when the part of the design of being connected, and when I connect to someone on LinkedIn, what I'm saying is, if there's anyone on the rest of my network that can help you, now by being connected to me, you can find them. You can find that I'm connected. And if you say, hey, actually, in fact, talking to James about this really interesting thing, it's like, oh, yeah, James would be interested in that. Let me connect you with James, right? And so that it's a way of kind of offering help, because life is a team sport, right? And again, friendship as a part of doing it. And then you will, of course, want to set a community of what the discourse is, a shared mission across the network of, we are trying to, and like the mission of the company is connect, talent with opportunity at a massive scale. Obviously, that includes jobs, a wide variety of other kinds of work things, and how do you enable that by having the right kinds of discourse and information and so forth, and that's all. And then, by the way, that gives you a lifetime, a work time, a multiple careers, a roadmap for what you're trying to do for people and their lives.
But I remember specifically back in the day, you chose, for example, not to put photos initially into LinkedIn. You made choices like that. And then there was a time when, in fact, you put a cap on the number of connections.
Yeah, well, cap on the number that was displayed.
Displayed, exactly. Yes. What was the thinking behind those kinds of decisions?
So one of the things that's also an underlying characteristic of competent consumer internet stuff is game dynamics. And we wanted to align game dynamics to things that would be better for people. And so, for example, one game dynamic that probably everybody in the audience is familiar with is a profile completeness bar. It's like being complete on your profile. Another one was how many connections. And you say, okay, people like to have metrics and play those games. And so we did the number of connections because we wanted to get people to realize life's a team sport, get connected. Then we found some people going, it's about being connected. And you're like, I have 10,000. How many do you have? And you're like, 10,000? Right. like there's no way, right? And so we said, okay, well, how do we both have that game dynamic, but also have it go to a point? And that's when we shifted it to 500 plus.
But Reid, if you go down this path of thinking through the 7 deadly sins and human nature, a cynical person might say this is exactly the problem with the internet, because we've done that too much. But you're arguing that we need to transform that. That doesn't sound like it's an easy thing to do. It's so much easier to go down the slippery slope.
It's not easy to do. It's one of the, I think, important things that as technologists, company leaders, and so forth, is to keep that pole star transformation in mind and what to do. And actually, in fact, ultimately, you're not just presence in society, but I think ultimately your members and your community is happier for it too. And so I think, and sometimes that makes, by the way, make hard decisions. Like very early in LinkedIn, we had this group called the LinkedIn Open Networkers that had a very different philosophy than we did. And we're like, look, we appreciate that you're here and part of it. We appreciate that you're getting value out of this. We appreciate that you're advocates of LinkedIn. And we're doing something moderately different than what you're suggesting because we think this is the best design for the entire, for everybody.
But for you as an investor, though, do you still explicitly think about companies and businesses and entrepreneurs in terms of how well are they tapping human nature? Because there also seem to be some investments you made that seem to tap into, I guess, the virtues of human nature. So I think of what Brian has done at Airbnb, for example, where they seem to tap into the human desire to connect and all these things. But how do you think about it as an investor?
But actually, even Airbnb, which is awesome, and Brian, one of the great entrepreneurs of our generation, to some degree, the Airbnb has a greed trigger because it's I have a cheaper room or I'm making money. But yet in that process of I'm doing this for the economics, I then also suddenly go, and I have a chance for a human connection. I have a chance to participate in someone's journey. I have a chance to participate in the local culture. And because the company has that as a true north, which is, yes, they are making money for the hosts. Yes, they are providing delightful experiences for the travelers. But they go, no, and the economics is a fundamental part of what's going on, but it's also about being human, about belonging. Like belonging is the mission, and having that elevation thing is the thing that I won't do an investment unless I think that aspiration of elevation is there.
But let's go back to your philosophical bent here, which is, go back to Adam Smith, theory of moral sentiments, to Wealth of Nations. At least in that thinking, the idea is that each person doing things that is in their self-interest,
yes,
the whole thing works out thanks to the invisible hand. But is there such an invisible hand here when it comes to these kinds of businesses, or do you need a founder, the team, or somebody to actually make it so that you transform the system? Otherwise, left its own devices, will it get there?
Look, I think it's one of the reasons we need institutions, we need governments, et cetera, is that, by nature, human beings without some structure, when they get to scale, are a mob, right? And sometimes the mob is like Woodstock or something else, and it's,
right,
it's great, but sometimes it's not, and it's terrible. And so I actually think that part of the responsibility for leaders of institutions, leaders of these networks, is to say, okay, how is it that we are contributing in a way that the individuals and the group are better off for the participation? And it's one of the reasons why, I personally find the discussion around freedom of speech to frequently be too simple. Which is you want freedom of speech, you want that individual, but also distinction freedom of speech and freedom of reach. It's no, but the dynamic as a group, the dynamic as a society is also important. And that's something you have to take some responsibility for when you're the leader of these networks.
Sounds like it's a lot of work, but worth doing.
It's essential.
Reid Hoffman, investor philosopher.
What's said at the summit stays at the summit.
Everybody will have to pay attention.
Almost no one sees this coming. Those founders are becoming more globally ambitious. They're coming after your talent, your capital, your market share.
The difficulty is when a team has been working so hard on one thing.
If you are trying to use your time and your talent and your money in the service of others, the work will never end.
We have to deal with inequities.
It's different if you're a founder, but when you walk into something so big and so perfect and so successful, it's not about me. It's about me becoming a part of it and just evolving it and making it better.
The thing that I love about it, and that makes me so optimistic, is that it's just creating more dialogue.
I'm here to tell you that, wow, human innovation's incredible.
This is Masters of Scale Summit.